Flow-based architecture is the most exciting emerging technological approach today and is rapidly growing in support capabilities within the Salesforce platform. It integrates systems logic, information, and constructs with user experience and facilitates interaction with distributed environments from which that experience requires or provides services and information. And why would you be interested? This and other flow integration components allow you to define and interact with other systems rapidly, securely, and flexibly, visually through flows and declaratively without programmatic development. Salesforce integration components couple your system logic with the user experience and with other systems from which that experience requires services and information, specifically using out-of-the-box webhooks commonly available on most web-based systems.
Welcome to a demonstration and some introductory instructions for Webhooks2Flow. Let's hop right into it. What is Webhook2Flow? Webhook2Flow is basically allowing an external system using a pre-created or one that you create yourself webhook, and using that webhook go directly into a Salesforce flow, including both the interface and the logic necessary to process it. In this case, there are two parts to the interface design. The first one, as you can see on the right here, is you actually use the variable definitions, the resource definitions in Salesforce to define your input and output. And then you start your auto-launched flow to actually process that logic. Today's demonstration, we're going to implement a Slack webhook channel mention, which is going to put a contact note of that mention on the user from that. After we demonstrate that, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on how we actually have to do some of the background setup, but the first part is the simplest part, which is implement the mention in a channel to a note on the user. So we're going to talk about how to implement a Webhook2Flow interface from an external webhook. It basically has three components from the Salesforce side. The first is we use the parameters coming from the webhook as a request in flow variables. These are resources which we define internal to the flow. And to make a request a flow, you basically just simply click on the make it available for input. Secondly, we service the payload that we got from the webhook using the logic structures that we're all familiar with of flows. And then finally, if we want to, we can respond to that webhook telling either what we did or any information necessary to continue with the webhook on the other side. In the first part of this demonstration, we're going to show a very basic concept, which is I want to use a webhook in Slack to post this message to a contact defined by this member ID on the Salesforce flow side. Now back to the flow slide. Remember, there are three parts that define the input, define the processing, and define the output. In order for this not to be excruciatingly painful for you to watch my typing, I've actually put up a template here. And I'm going to explain the template in a second, but the first thing we have to remember is let's do a new resource. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be defining the resource necessary to do the input coming from the webhook on the Slack side. And in this case, I've already created an Apex defined Slack event. And here's the critical part, make it available for input. Having done this, let's do it. Good point. The name that the webhook expects this input to be taken is event. So this is the name as it's sent from the webhook, and this is what is in it, which is a Slack event. Now, having done that, we're going to actually take this information, which we have here, and we're going to do something with it. What we're going to do with is we are going to take the Slack user ID for this is going to be the value that we're getting from the event, which is the user. That is the first part of the logic. We're going to get into some authorization stuff later, but for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to get the who initiated this mention on the Slack side, and then we're going to create a note and attach it to them as a contact on the Salesforce side. So the second part of this, having defined that, we're going to say, okay, who is the body? The body is going to be, let's just say that's also coming from the event that is posted by the webhook on the Slack side. And we're just going to say that is going to be the text that they're posting. The parent ID, in other words, where we're going to attach this to is going to be the contact that we looked up in that previous thing. It's going to be ID. All right. And let's also make the title, just for simplicity's sake, the title is going to be the same as the input text. This is done. We are going to save this. And we're going to activate it. So if we now send this message, what we should see happening is that it is going to be posted to this contact because we've identified it with the proper Slack ID. And what we should see is a related record, a note and attachment being added to it. So let's go to our Slack, send the message. This message has now been sent. Let's go back and take a look and see if we successfully received it here. And as you can see, it sent that message that we posted right here. So what we have done here is we have created the interface, this is the calling payload from the webhook, which is the event. We took from the event and said we want to use that user to attach it to the contact. We created the contact record here, and we're done. Before we get to the next part, I'd like to do a couple of shout outs. First of all, to the unofficial Salesforce team, who's a group of inspired individuals who's very helpful in both ideas and in technical advice in doing this. Of course, to Alex Edelstein, who's the fearless leader of that group, even though it's an unofficial group. And I'd also like to state some appreciation for Tom Snyder, who's done a lot of the endpoint work and some of the more sophisticated logging capabilities which are included in this. It's definitely a team effort, and these have all been great contributors. In the next part of this demonstration, we're going to drill down just a little bit further, and specifically we're going to talk about how you would find the webhooks on the external systems to Salesforce that you want to interface with Salesforce. And part of it is also going to be looking at some of the authentication requirements and some actual drill down into the payloads. After this, there will be an additional demonstration and instructional video, which is going to go into the remainder of these components, which is how to set up the Salesforce connection, authenticate, and test, and then some advanced features that are built into Webhooks2Flow, including logging and the ability to create an external webhook all of your own. For this demonstration, we used Slack because Slack has a very nicely defined set of webhooks that you can use. And the way that you use them in Slack is via the Slack API. In this case, I've already kind of set one up, but you go in and you say, hey, I want to set up a new webhook. You tell it which features you want to set it up with. And within that, in this case, we're going to be some bot events here. It will go down and you can drill down into the specific area where it will define for you exactly what the payloads are going to look like on the receiving end of your webhook. Most major systems today, especially if they're running in the cloud, already have a set of predefined webhooks. You don't have to use Slack, but most of them will have it. I'm just showing an example of a create event in GitHub, which also has a very nicely predefined set of webhooks that you can use straight out of the box. Now with Slack, every system that you have is going to have, or should have at least, some form of security to make sure that it's not just either pounding or relaying off of your Salesforce instance. Slack has a two-part. One of them is verify that the person who's sending this actually wants to get it, and that's via connection we're going to look at. And then the second part is you can sign each and every message that you send to make sure that it is a message actually coming from Slack, not just a random poster from somewhere else. So actually, one of the things that we're going to look at here that I find fascinating is for the authentication process. In other words, is the Salesforce instance going to accept information from Slack? It actually uses a webhook to do that original verification. This is one I like to show because it's pretty much as simple a webhook as you can get. And what it says is, if you will accept this webhook, I want you to do something for me. And it's going to send me three things. It's going to send me a token, challenge, and tell me that it's going to be doing URL verification. And what I have to do is I have to respond to Slack with the challenge that it sent me originally. So by looking at pretty much the simplest webhook that we could possibly implement here is going to be the URL verification. And all we're basically going to do is say that if you have sent me a URL verification, I'm going to return to you what you've asked for. Now we know that it's going to be three things that we're going to be getting. One of them is going to be the token. So we create a new resource saying variable. The API name is going to be token, exactly the same as we saw in the payload. This, of course, is going to be a text. It's available for input. The second resource is the challenge. Now, the challenge is going to be a little bit different. And it's also a variable. It's going to be the challenge. And it's going to also be text. Now, I'm going to have to go back and do something I didn't do here, but unlike the one before, that is available for input, and I want to send it back to the Slack request URL saying, this is a challenge you sent me, I'm sending it back to you, that's what you said you have to do to verify. Before I forget, let me go ahead. Oh, I did make it, okay. And then, of course, the third variable that we see in the, third parameter is type. And the type is going to be, I've already put the type here. I'm also going to make sure it's available for input. Okay, I'm going to save it. And activate it. Now, having done our flow with our required inputs and our required output there, I'm going to copy the name of the flow. And using the algorithm, which is explained in detail in the documentation, we're going to tell, cancel there, we're going to say, I want to change this. And basically what it did was it added to the URL that particular flow. And as you can see, it just went out and verified it. So what you've seen there is the simplest possible one, which is I had to take 3 inputs, which are the payloads, which were type, token, and challenge, and return one of those to them available for output. And when I did that, I actually had a little webhook that created a verification process. And that concludes this part of the demonstration, where we started by doing a very simple webhook interface, which allowed a message to be posted on a contact as a note to a user. We dug down a little bit deeper in showing how you could actually build from scratch an interface and a very simple logic using the URL verification required by Slack. In our next presentation, we are going to be talking about how to set up a Salesforce connection, the actual physical connection itself, and some more of the advanced features available within Webhook. Thank you very much, and I hope this is useful to you.